Please update your email signatures to reflect the new reporting structure. That message popped up while I was still groggy from surgery, still hooked to IVs, barely able to sit up, no call, no warning. Just a public execution and a company group chat. 30 minutes after they wheeled me into the OR. 22 years. Gone, while I was under anesthesia. But the second betrayal? It came minutes later. Laughing emojis from people I trained, mentored, carried through crises. About time, they wrote. They thought I'd be too doped up to notice. They forgot who taught them to document everything. My email from that hospital bed didn't just shake the building, it made HR call me, trembling. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Thomas Everett, and I'm 53 years old. After 22 years at Lakeview Supply, I've built a comfortable life as Regional Operations Director, sharing a newly remodeled kitchen with my wife Sarah. The warm hum of our dishwasher fills our home each evening, a simple comfort I've earned alongside my approved FMLA paperwork for surgery. Kyle Madsen, our 30-year-old VP whom I once mentored, has been slowly chipping away at my authority with subtle digs and calculated power moves. My jaw tightens every time he accidentally excludes me from key meetings. But what Kyle doesn't realize is that I've documented every slight, every policy breach, every manipulative play he's made. The knife that cuts deepest often comes from someone you trained to sharpen it. But let me start from the beginning. I'd always been the kind of guy who double-checked everything. Triple-checked, if I'm being honest. You don't spend 2 decades climbing from warehouse grunt to regional operations director by leaving things to chance. So that morning, before heading to St. Mary's for my hernia surgery, I went through my checklist one last time. FMLA paperwork? Filed and approved 3 weeks ago. My delegate, Mike from shipping, fully briefed on every ongoing project. Inbox? Clean as a whistle. Ever notice how the more prepared you are, the more your mind invents new worries? I kept patting my jacket pocket, making sure I hadn't forgotten my phone, even though I'd checked it 5 times already. The pre-op nurse walked me through the usual routine. Blood pressure, medical history, signing forms, all while I fought the urge to check my work email one last time. Sarah squeezed my hand and gave me that look, the one that said, "Everything's under control." She wasn't wrong. I'd earned this time to take care of myself. "Mr. Everett?" The anesthesiologist appeared, clipboard in hand. "Ready to get started?" I nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. Not from the surgery, that was routine stuff. No, something else was nagging at me. Maybe it was Kyle's smirk during our last meeting, or how he'd forgotten to copy me on that regional logistics report. But then the drugs hit my system, and everything went soft around the edges. When I came to, the room was doing that slow spin that comes with good painkillers. Sarah had stepped out to grab coffee, and I was just starting to feel human again when my phone buzzed on the side table. Multiple notifications. Must be the team checking in. You know that moment when you're still fuzzy from anesthesia, and reality feels a bit sideways? That's where I was when I opened our workgroup chat. The messages started rolling in, blurring together at first. Then my vision sharpened, and my blood ran cold. Kyle Madsen, 2:14 p.m. Effective immediately. Tom is no longer with the company. Please direct all operational questions to my office. The responses flooded in before I could process what I was reading. Jim from accounting, surprise emoji. Rachel, sales. Wait, what? Steve K, about time. Melissa, seriously? Dave Wilson. Called it! My fingers went numb against the phone screen. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank gone wrong? But Kyle's message sat there, official and cold, time-stamped just 30 minutes after they'd wheeled me into surgery. I switched to my email, thumb trembling as I scrolled. Nothing. No termination notice. No HR communication. Just the usual flood of shipping reports and meeting invites. The silence was deafening. More messages kept coming. Angela P. Who's handling the Wilson account now? Kyle Madsen. I'll be overseeing all major accounts personally during this transition. Mark T. Drinks at O'Malley's tonight? I stared at the screen, Watching people I'd worked with for years, people I'd trained and mentored, casually discussing my professional execution like it was yesterday's weather. The IV drip beside me kept its steady rhythm while my world tilted on its axis. Sarah walked in, coffee in hand, and stopped short when she saw my face. "Tom, what's wrong?" I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. Instead, I just turned the phone toward her. She nearly dropped her coffee as she read, her face flushing with anger. "They can't do this," she whispered, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "You're literally in the hospital. They approved your leave." I closed my eyes, feeling the surgical stitches pull as I shifted in the bed. 22 years. More than 2 decades of early mornings, late nights, missed weekends, solving other people's emergencies. All erased in a group chat while I was under anesthesia. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Kyle. "Please update your email signatures to reflect the new reporting structure." The room felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. I kept scrolling through my inbox, searching for something, anything, official. But there was nothing. Just the usual stream of shipping, manifests, and CC'd emails that now felt like artifacts from another life. You ever notice how your mind works overtime in a crisis? Mine was already calculating mortgage payments, insurance premiums, Sarah's part-time teacher's salary. 22 years of financial planning, crumbling because some kid with a fancy title decided to play emperor while I was knocked out. "Tom," Sarah's voice cut through my spiral. "Your blood pressure." She was right. The monitor beside me was beeping faster than it should. I took a deep breath, feeling the pull of fresh stitches. That familiar ache centered me somehow. Reminded me that I wasn't powerless. "Hand me my briefcase," I said. Sarah looked confused but reached for the leather bag under the visitor's chair. I'd packed it meticulously the night before. Old habits die hard. Inside was a folder labeled FMLA documentation. Everything dated and organized. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, watching me pull out my reading glasses. "I'm thinking Kyle forgot something important." My fingers weren't quite steady as I opened my email. But my mind was clear. Crystal clear. He forgot I never go into anything without backup. I started a new draft, addressing it to Kyle, with CCs to HR Director Janet Matthews and the legal department. The words came slow but sure, each one measured. "Kyle." I was surprised to learn of my termination through the company group chat while recovering from surgery that was approved under FMLA protection last month. I've attached the relevant documentation, including your signed approval from our March 15th meeting. As you're aware, terminating an employee during approved medical leave raises significant legal concerns. I'm sure this is simply an oversight that HR can clarify. I look forward to discussing this matter once I've completed my approved recovery period. Regards, Thomas Everett, Regional Operations Director, Lakeview Supply. Sarah read over my shoulder. That's surprisingly calm. Sometimes the quietest punch lands hardest. I attached the FMLA paperwork, forms, approvals, doctor's notes, all of it, and hit send. The pain meds were wearing off, but I didn't buzz for the nurse. I needed my head clear. I checked the time. 4:47 p.m. Most of the office would be heading home soon. The real response wouldn't come until morning. Except it didn't take that long. At 6:13 p.m., my phone rang. Janet Matthews, HR Director. I put it on speaker so Sarah could hear. "Tom?" Janet's voice had that careful tone HR people use when they're walking through a minefield. We just received your email." "Evening, Janet. I'm still a bit groggy from surgery, but I wanted to make sure there hadn't been some miscommunication." A pause. I could practically hear her shuffling papers. "Tom, I want to be very clear. We were not aware of any planned termination. Kyle did not have authorization to make this announcement." My heart rate steadied. "I see. We'll be addressing this first thing tomorrow morning. For now, please disregard the group chat message. Your position and FMLA status remain unchanged." Sarah squeezed my hand. I kept my voice level. "I appreciate the quick response, Janet. I assume you'll be issuing a correction to the team?" Another pause. Longer this time. "This Situation will require some delicate handling. Kyle is a VP, yes, but I'm sure the legal department will have thoughts on how an unauthorized termination during protected medical leave should be handled. Yes, Janet said quickly. Yes, they certainly will. Please focus on your recovery, Tom. We'll sort this out properly. After we hung up, Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. That was just the beginning, I finished, settling back against the hospital pillows. The heart monitor had returned to its steady rhythm, but my mind was racing ahead, mapping out moves and counter-moves. Kyle had shown his hand too early, tried to checkmate before he had the pieces in position. The group chat had gone silent. No more jokes, no more celebration, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. I closed my eyes, remembering the look on Kyle's face last week when I'd questioned his new routing protocol, that flash of raw hatred beneath the corporate smile. He tried to erase me with a single message, thinking I'd be too doped up to fight back. But he'd forgotten something crucial. I'd spent 2 decades documenting everything. 3 days after surgery, I was finally home, propped up in my study with an ice pack and my old laptop. Sarah had tried getting me to rest in bed, but I couldn't, not with what was churning in my mind. You need to heal, she'd said, bringing me chamomile tea I hadn't asked for. This is healing, I replied, pulling up my archive folder. Just a different kind. You know that feeling when you start cleaning out your garage, and suddenly every box holds some forgotten story? That's what it was like, diving into 22 years of digital history. Except, these weren't just memories. They were ammunition. First came the emails. Hundreds of them, meticulously sorted by year and project. That was always my thing. Document everything, keep it organized. The guys used to joke about it, called me the librarian. Funny how habits like that pay off when you least expect them. I started with last year's third-quarter logistics overhaul, Kyle's big push to modernize our routing system. My cursor hovered over a folder labeled Route Optimization 2023. Inside were dozens of warning emails I'd sent him about rushed implementation, untested protocols, potential compliance issues. Each one met with the same response. Noted, proceeding as planned. Then came the aftermath. Shipping delays. Cost, overruns. Angry clients. And somehow, in every status report Kyle sent upstairs, the problems landed in my column. Regional ops failing to adapt to new procedures. Legacy management resisting innovation. My jaw clenched just reading them again. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started logging dates, incidents, paper trails. One column for Kyle's decisions, another for the consequences, and a third for how he'd shifted blame. The pattern emerged like a time-lapse photo developing in dark room. September 2023. Kyle bypassed safety protocols on the new loading dock system. 3 near misses with forklifts. My incident reports mysteriously disappeared from the system, replaced with a note about operator error. November 2023. Rush implementation of untested inventory software. $300,000 in misplaced stock. Kyle's report blamed inadequate staff training under my supervision. January 2024. Forced overtime violations I'd flagged weeks before. Kyle's response? A memo questioning my commitment to modernization. The timestamps told their own story. Late-night system changes made without approval. Backdated authorizations. Policy violations swept under digital rugs while I worked overtime, keeping the wheels from falling off. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, one of my shift supervisors. You okay, boss? Place is chaos without you. I set the phone aside. Couldn't deal with that yet. Instead, I opened our company's Slack history. There it was, channel after channel of questions dodged, warnings ignored, problems buried. Kyle had used my reputation as cover, knowing people trusted my judgment. Then he tried to throw me away like yesterday's shipping manifest. Sarah came in with more tea, took one look at my face. Found something? Found everything, I said, turning the laptop so she could see. Every time he screwed up. Every time he needed someone to blame. Look at the dates, the patterns. She leaned in, scanning the spreadsheet. Her expression hardened. He used you as insurance. More like a human shield, I corrected, shifting the ice pack. Long as I was around to take the hits, his mistakes couldn't touch him. But now he's exposed, she finished. I nodded, adding another entry to the spreadsheet. The surgery incision throbbed, but I barely noticed. 22 years of institutional knowledge stared back from the screen. Every process I'd refined, every crisis I'd managed, every shortcut Kyle had taken while climbing over my back. Remember when Dad's construction company went under? Sarah asked suddenly. How that foreman tried to blame him for the bad concrete pour. Yeah, I said, thinking back to those long nights at her father's kitchen table, piecing together proof of what really happened. Dad taught me something important then. Paper trails don't lie, and liars leave trails. I opened another folder, this one labeled Staff Communications 2023 to 2024. Inside were dozens of conversations with my team, documenting the real-time fallout from Kyle's decisions. Good people stretched to breaking point, trying to patch holes in a ship Kyle kept drilling into. The screen blurred slightly. I'd been staring at it too long, but I couldn't stop. Each file was another piece of the puzzle, another receipt for the bill that was coming due. Kyle hadn't just tried to fire me, he'd tried to erase 2 decades of truth, but he'd forgotten about the backup copies. The next morning, I was scrolling through old org charts when something caught my eye. Janine Colfax's name, once prominent in weekly finance reports, had faded from view around the same time Kyle started restructuring. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen her silver-streaked bun bobbing through the hallway in months. Janine had been our payroll bedrock for over 30 years, the kind of person who could spot a decimal error at 50 paces and knew every overtime regulation by heart. More importantly, she had access to every financial record that passed through Lakeview's system. I found her number in my contacts and dialed. 3 rings. Then her careful, measured voice. Thomas? I heard what happened. Got time for coffee? I asked. That little place on Mason Street? A pause. Tomorrow at 10? The next morning, I eased into a corner booth at Carson's Coffee, trying not to wince. Janine was already there, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, wearing one of her trademark cardigans. She looked smaller somehow, like someone had dimmed her usual quiet confidence. How's recovery? She asked as I settled in. Better than my career prospects, I managed to smile. Though I hear you might understand something about that. Her fingers tightened on the mug. So you noticed. Hard not to notice when our best number cruncher disappears from meetings. I leaned forward. What happened, Janine? She glanced around, then reached into her sensible shoulder bag. Out came a thin manila folder. First, it was fresh perspectives needed in financial planning. Then, streamlining the reporting structure. Her voice carried decades of controlled frustration. By March, I was consulting on special projects, which meant being locked out of my own systems. I thought back to March, right when Kyle had pushed through those questionable overtime arrangements. He sidelined you. Worse. She opened the folder. He tried to make me complicit, started asking me to adjust certain reports, reclassify expenses. When I refused, she slid several papers across the table. Well, suddenly my traditional methods were holding back progress. I scanned the documents, altered payroll codes, misclassified contractor payments, labor hours that didn't add up. Jesus, Janine. I kept copies, she said simply. Every original, every revised version, every email where I raised concerns. A hint of her old steel crept into her voice. 30 years in payroll teaches you to document everything. The waitress stopped by. I ordered black coffee, buying time to process. When she left, I pulled out my laptop. Look at this, I said, opening my spreadsheet. Timeline of Kyle's operational changes. See if anything lines up. Janine put on her reading glasses, leaning in. Her finger traced down the dates, stopping at key points. Here, October. When he rushed that contractor payment, it matches a spike in misclassified labor costs. She flipped through her papers. And this system upgrade in December, right when my access levels were suddenly reconfigured. Because you would have caught the compliance issues. I finished. She nodded grimly. He needed both of us out of the way. You for operations knowledge, me for financial oversight. The perfect combination to hide his shortcuts. I sat back, ignoring the pull of stitches. You know what this means, don't you? That between your operational records and my financial documentation. A small, fierce smile crossed her face. We have everything. I thought about Kyle sitting in his glass office, thinking he'd cleared the board of old pieces that might block his game. But he'd forgotten something crucial. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should watch out for. And he'd managed to cross two of the most detail-oriented people in the company. We need to combine everything, I said. Match your numbers to my operational timeline. Build something they can't ignore. Janine was already pulling out more folders. I have access to the archived servers until end of month, part of my transition period. Perfect. I've got all the operational documentation backed up at home. I took a sip of coffee, feeling more energized than I had since the surgery. Kyle thinks he buried us in bureaucracy. But we are the bureaucracy, Janine finished, that steel now fully present in her voice. We spent the next hour aligning dates, matching incidents to numbers, building a framework that would make any auditor's heart sing. 2 careers' worth of institutional knowledge, finally joining forces. Looking at Janine's methodical note-taking, I remembered something she'd said years ago during a particularly nasty audit. Numbers tell stories, Thomas. Our job is to make sure they tell the true one. For the next 3 days, Janine and I worked like a couple of digital archaeologists, piecing together Kyle's trail of corporate destruction. I'd set up a secure Google Drive folder, old habits from managing sensitive shipping manifests, and we started building our case, one damning file at a time. Look at this, Janine said during one of our video calls. Her screen shared a spreadsheet that made my eyes hurt just looking at it. These overtime adjustments from February? Kyle backdated them to January to dodge the quarterly review. I added it to our timeline, right between his mysterious budget reallocations and that supplier contract he'd pushed through without proper vetting. Got it. Matches perfectly with when he started pushing me out of vendor meetings. You know those moments when everything starts clicking into place? When all those little oddities that nagged at you suddenly form a clear picture? That's what was happening here. Every document we uploaded, every screenshot we saved, added another piece to the puzzle. Janine had been methodical about preserving evidence. 20 years of internal audits taught me never to trust the system alone, she explained, sharing another folder of archived emails. I keep local copies of everything important. Smart woman. I'd done something similar, though more out of operations paranoia than audit experience. Every critical email saved as a PDF. Every policy change documented with before and after screenshots. Even those passive-aggressive Slack messages where Kyle had started undermining my authority, all preserved in my personal records. Here's something interesting, I said, pulling up a series of messages from last December. Remember that rush delivery fiasco with the Milwaukee account? The one that nearly cost us the contract? Yeah. Kyle told senior management I'd signed off on the routing change. But look. I shared my screen, showing the original approval chain. I was literally in a budget meeting he'd scheduled when that decision was made. We were building something solid. Timeline, documentation, witness statements, the kind of evidence that makes HR directors sweat and legal teams pay attention. But Kyle wasn't stupid. He must have caught wind of something. Because when I logged into our internal system the next morning to grab some supporting documents, things had changed. My last 2 performance reviews, the ones where I'd consistently exceeded expectations, looked different. The ratings were the same, but the comments? Subtle changes. Where it had said, demonstrates exceptional leadership, it now read, meets basic requirements. Little tweaks that painted a picture of mediocrity rather than excellence. Janine, I called her immediately. Check something for me. That Slack thread from March about the inventory discrepancy, can you see it? I heard her keyboard clicking. Then silence. It's gone. The whole conversation just vanished. My stomach tightened, but not from the surgery. He's covering his tracks. But how? He shouldn't have that level of access to HR files. I thought about Kyle's fancy new title, his convenient friendship with IT. Want to bet he called in some favors? Wait. More clicking from Janine's end. The payroll system logs. There's a gap. 4 hours last night, marked as routine maintenance, during which he could have accessed anything. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing. He's trying to rewrite history. Good thing we've got the original versions, Janine said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. Every edit he makes just proves he's got something to hide. I opened our timeline document, adding these latest developments. We need to move faster. The more time we give him, the more evidence he can try to alter. Already on it, Janine replied. I'm pulling the access logs for the past 6 months. Every system entry, every file modification, it'll show exactly when these changes were made. I thought about all those years I'd spent building systems to track every package, every delivery, every inventory change. You know what's funny? He taught me the importance of documentation himself. How's that? Back when he was just starting, he messed up a major shipment. No paper trail, no backup plan. I had to bail him out. I shook my head at the memory. Told him right then, in this business, your documentation is your defense. Guess he took that lesson a little too much to heart. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Kyle had learned about the importance of documentation from me, and now he was desperately trying to erase it. But he'd forgotten something crucial. In a company this size, nothing ever truly disappears. There's always a backup, always a log, always someone who kept their own records. And he'd managed to target the 2 people who kept the most detailed records of all. The email from HR landed on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent. My coffee was still too hot to drink when I opened it, steam rising like the tension in my chest. Dear Mr. Everett, this letter is to inform you that Lakeview Supply has initiated a formal internal review regarding recent events. The investigation will conclude within 2 weeks, with findings to be presented to the board on Friday, August 12th. I set my mug down carefully. 2 weeks. 14 days to make our case bulletproof. The timeline suddenly felt impossibly tight. My phone buzzed. Janine, did you see? Just reading it now. 2 weeks doesn't give us much runway. No, she agreed. But I've got something interesting. Been tracking Kyle's system logins since 2 a.m. He accessed the HR database. That caught my attention. What's he doing poking around at that hour? More cleanup, probably. But here's the thing. Every login leaves a fingerprint. Time, location, which files were accessed. He can delete content, but he can't hide the fact he was there. I thought about all those late nights I'd spent teaching Kyle the ropes years ago. The way he'd lean forward, eager to learn, writing everything down. Back then, I'd seen it as dedication. Now I wondered if he'd been cataloging weaknesses all along. We need to lay this out step by step, I said. Make it so clear that even his usual smooth talk can't explain it away. Remember those quarterly reviews where Kyle would charm his way through missed targets? He'd flash that practice smile, crack a self-deprecating joke, and somehow walk out with praise instead of warnings. But charm couldn't erase data trails. I pulled up a fresh document and started typing. Every incident where Kyle had dodged responsibility by blaming others. Every policy breach he'd covered with a quick fix that created bigger problems down the line. The Milwaukee account disaster. The inventory system upgrade that lost 3 days of data. The safety protocol shortcuts that nearly got 2 warehouse workers injured. Janine, I called her back. Can you pull something for me? Remember last March when Kyle changed the bonus structure without approval? Already on it. I've got the original policy documents, his unauthorized revisions, and, this is interesting, 3 different versions of the announcement email. Each one with a different explanation for who approved the changes. I added it to the timeline. The pattern was becoming clearer with each entry. Kyle's fingerprints were all over these decisions, but someone else's name always ended up on the incident reports. My phone pinged again, this time with a message from HR requesting a formal statement. Standard procedure, but the timing felt significant. They were gathering ammunition. Janine, they're going to want your statement too. We need to coordinate. Already drafted. I'm focusing on the data trails, login records, file access patterns, modification timestamps, things that can't be explained away with a winning smile. She was right. Kyle had always been good at working the room, reading people, knowing exactly what story they wanted to hear. In meetings, he'd position himself as the forward-thinking innovator, while painting veterans like us as resistant to change. It had worked because he understood something crucial. People prefer a confident lie to an uncomfortable truth. But numbers don't care about charm. Data doesn't respond to flattery. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously documenting every instance where Kyle's innovations had actually been cover-ups for mistakes. Each entry backed by timestamps, system logs, and witness accounts. The picture it painted wasn't of a dynamic young leader streamlining operations. It showed a pattern of reckless decisions and calculated blame shifting. "Got another one," Janine messaged. "Remember that payroll glitch in May? Just found evidence of manual overrides from Kyle's login. He knew about the error 3 days before it hit the system." I added it to the file. The timeline now ran to 12 pages, each incident documented with the kind of detail that would make an auditor proud. But would it be enough? Kyle had a way of turning accusations into misunderstandings, critics into contrarians. He'd probably claim we were bitter about change, resistant to his modern management style. I could almost hear his defense. In any major transformation, there's bound to be some friction with traditional elements. The HR review clock was ticking. 14 days to cut through years of carefully crafted perception. 14 days to prove that efficiency wasn't the same as excellence, that innovation without integrity was just sophisticated sabotage. I looked at my watch. 13 days, 16 hours remaining. Time to make every minute count. 10 days before the HR deadline, Kyle started showing his teeth. First came the email about a routine audit of my old department. Then another about documentation verification of past projects. You know that feeling when someone's trying to intimidate you but wants to keep their hands clean? That's what this was. I remembered the way Kyle used to handle warehouse conflicts. Always indirect, always through channels that left no fingerprints. Now he was using the same playbook on me. "Thomas," Janine's voice crackled through my phone one morning. "They're auditing payroll records going back 3 years. Kyle's got his new assistant crawling through everything." "Let them look," I said, but my stomach tightened. We've got nothing to hide. The next day, HR sent me a carefully worded email about retirement planning resources. Helpful, they called it. Just routine information about options for employees in the latter phase of their careers. I had to laugh. I wasn't even close to retirement age, but the message was crystal clear. Remember those old westerns where the bad guy would shoot at someone's feet to make them dance? That's what this felt like. Kyle was firing warning shots, seeing if he could make us nervous enough to back down. "He's getting sloppy," Janine said when we met for coffee 3 days later. Her silver-streaked bun was coming loose, like she'd been running her hands through it. "The more pressure he feels, the more mistakes he's making." She pulled out her tablet, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up a document. "Look at this. Found it buried in last month's termination paperwork." It was a payroll adjustment form, dated 2 days before my surgery. My signature was at the bottom, authorizing a change in my employment status. "I never signed this," I said, leaning closer. The signature looked right at first glance, the same slant to the T, the same loop in the E. But something felt off. Janine nodded, already pulling up another document. My actual signature from a recent expense report. "Look at them, side by side." The differences jumped out now. The forged signature was too perfect, like someone had traced it. The real one had the slight pressure variations you get from natural handwriting. "He forged my signature," I said slowly, the reality sinking in. "While I was in surgery, Kyle forged my signature on termination paperwork." My hands were steady as I took photos of both documents. Years of handling warehouse crises had taught me to stay calm when things got serious. And this? This was serious. "There's more," Janine said, her voice dropping. "I checked the metadata. This form was created and modified on Kyle's computer. He didn't even try to cover his tracks." The arrogance of it hit me like a physical blow. Kyle had been so sure of his power, so confident in his ability to push us out, that he hadn't bothered with basic precautions. "He must have thought we'd never see this," I said. that we'd be too scared or too beaten down to look. Janine's eyes met mine. He forgot who he was dealing with. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady me. The smell reminded me of countless mornings in my office, planning shipments and solving problems. Back then, every challenge had a logical solution. This one did too. "We need to document everything about this form," I said. "Chain of custody, creation date, modification history, everything. Then we take it straight to legal." Janine was already typing notes. "I'll pull the access logs for the payroll system. Show exactly when and where this was uploaded." The forgery changed everything. This wasn't just about office politics anymore. Kyle hadn't just tried to push us out. He'd committed fraud. The kind that companies couldn't ignore, no matter how charming the perpetrator. 7 days left in the review, Janine said, checking her calendar. "Think that's enough time?" I looked at the forged signature again, thinking about all the times Kyle had smiled at me across conference tables while planning this. More than enough. Janine and I spent the weekend organizing everything into a single devastating document. You know those moments when you're so focused, time just slips away? That was us, fueled by coffee and determination, cross-referencing every detail 3 times over. "Put the forgery first," Janine said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Hit them with the criminal stuff before they can start rationalizing the pattern." I nodded, placing the signature analysis and metadata right after the cover page. The forged document would be impossible to explain away. No gray areas, no misunderstandings. Just pure, provable fraud. Behind that came everything else. Screenshots of altered performance reviews. Time-stamped email chains showing Kyle taking credit for fixes to his own mistakes. Payroll irregularities that somehow always benefited his allies. 22 years of institutional knowledge helped me connect dots that younger eyes might miss. 47 pages, I said, scrolling through the final PDF. "Think anyone will actually read it all?" Janine smiled, that quiet smile I'd seen 1,000 times in budget meetings. "They'll read it, because on page 3, I included the estimated cost of Kyle's creative accounting." She was right. Nothing gets corporate attention like numbers in red. We'd calculated every penny of waste from Kyle's mismanagement. Projects delayed, overtime burned, talent lost. The total made my whistleblower settlement look like pocket change. Sunday night, I sat at my kitchen counter, finger hovering over the send button. The room still smelled faintly of paint from our remodel, a reminder of simpler times just weeks ago. My wife squeezed my shoulder. "Send it," she said softly. "You've triple-checked everything." The email went to HR, Legal, and the Ethics Committee at 9:47 p.m. Subject line: Chronology of Ethical Breaches. Supporting documentation. Professional. Understated. Lethal. Monday morning crawled by in silence. Every email notification made my heart jump, but they were just regular work stuff, shipping updates, routine reports. The waiting felt like those long minutes before a summer storm, when the air gets heavy and still. Around 2 o'clock, my phone buzzed. "Janine, check your inbox," she said, voice tight with excitement. "Company-wide announcement." I opened the email, hands steady despite my racing pulse. The message was brief, corporate speak at its finest. Effective immediately. Kyle Madsen has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Please direct all operational inquiries to. "They suspended him," Janine whispered. "Same day they got our report." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But even as relief washed over me, experience whispered caution. I'd seen this dance before, executives put on leave, given time to spend with family while their allies worked the back channels. "It's a good first step," I said carefully. "But suspension isn't the same as consequences." "What do you mean?" I thought about all the times I'd watched Kyle charm his way out of trouble, how he'd turned setbacks into stepping stones. Suspensions can be lifted. Reputations are harder to repair. We need to make sure the truth stays in the light. "The report's pretty damning," Janine said. "Hard to spin forged signatures." "True, but Kyle's got friends in high places, people who've backed his plays, who might go down with him if everything comes out. I rubbed my temples, thinking, this is when it gets complicated. So what's our next move? Before I could answer, another email landed. This one from legal, requesting a meeting first thing tomorrow. Not asking, telling. Now we wait, I said, already mentally preparing for the meeting. And we keep every scrap of evidence backed up in triplicate. The rest of the afternoon felt surreal. People tried to act normal, but you could feel the tension humming through every team chat, every video call. Kyle's empty office stood like a warning sign, his sleek desk collecting dust while somewhere committees were deciding fates. I caught my reflection in the window, gray at the temples, lines around my eyes from years of early mornings and late nights, but my shoulders were straight. For the first time since waking up from surgery to that brutal group chat, I felt like myself again. The suspension was just the beginning. Kyle had taught me that the hard way, no victory was certain until it was carved in stone. But I'd learned a few things over my 22 years too. Like how to be patient, how to build things that last, and, most importantly, how to finish what I start. The next morning hit different. Kyle's name had vanished from the company directory, his profile gone from Teams, his fancy digital signature stripped from every template. It was like watching someone get erased pixel by pixel. Reminded me of that old photo editing trick where you'd slowly fade someone out of a picture, except this was happening in real time across our whole system. My inbox started filling up with messages, not the usual flood of reports and requests, but something more personal, more hesitant. The first one came from Derek in shipping. Thanks for standing up. We all saw what was happening but didn't know what to do. Then Maria from accounts. My husband got pushed out the same way last year. This means more than you know. They kept coming. Quick notes, brief thanks, stories that should have been told sooner. Each one carried the same undertone, relief mixed with a hint of shame. Like they were finally exhaling after holding their breath for months, maybe years. You know that feeling when you're working on your car and you finally get that seized bolt to break loose? That's what it felt like. All this built-up tension suddenly releasing. Janine stopped by my office around lunch, carrying 2 cups of that horrible break room coffee we'd complained about for years. HR's in a panic, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Kyle's whole modernization initiative was smoke and mirrors. Half the efficiency numbers he reported were inflated. I took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the familiar burnt taste. Not surprised. He was always better at presentations than operations. They're scrambling to find someone who actually knows how things work. She gave me a meaningful look. Someone with experience. I set my cup down. They've been asking about you too, haven't they? She nodded, offered me my old position back, plus a fancy new title, Senior Financial Operations Director, or something equally wordy. And I told them I'd think about it. She paused. What about you? Word is they're preparing a reinstatement package. Full benefits, back pay, probably a promotion to smooth things over. The old break room clock ticked away on the wall, same one that had been there since my first day. 22 years of watching that minute hand crawl through meetings, through late shifts, through endless crisis management sessions. You know what I realized during my recovery? I leaned back in my chair. All those times I stayed late, fixed other people's messes, kept quiet when things didn't sit right. I thought I was being professional, loyal. But really, I was just teaching them how to treat me. Janine nodded slowly. So what are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. HR wanted to meet. Urgent. I'd been expecting this. The meeting was exactly what Janine predicted. They had a whole package ready, reinstatement with a promotion, back pay, even a corner office. The HR director, Ellen, laid it out like she was dealing cards she knew would win. We value your experience, Thomas, she said, sliding the folder across her desk. The company needs steady hands right now, proven leadership. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. 22 years, Ellen. You know what I did with most of them? Solved problems, fixed systems, built teams that actually worked. I met her eyes. But I did it while looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next Kyle would come along. She shifted uncomfortably. We've learned from this situation. Policies are being reviewed. They always are, I cut in, keeping my voice level. But here's what I learned. Sometimes loyalty means knowing when to walk away. What are you saying? I stood up, straightening my jacket, the same one I'd worn to countless meetings like this. I'm saying thank you, but no. I've got a different vision in mind. Thomas, please consider. I have considered. Very carefully. I headed for the door, then paused. You know what the real problem was? Not Kyle. It was a system that let him happen. And I'm done being part of that system. Walking back to my office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The corridor looked different somehow. Not like a place I needed to defend anymore, but just a hallway with some dated carpet and fluorescent lights. My phone buzzed again. Another message from a colleague. Whatever you decide to do next, some of us would follow you. I smiled, thinking about the consulting firm paperwork sitting in my home office. Sometimes the best way forward is through a different door entirely. 2 days after I turned down reinstatement, Janine called me. Her voice had that particular kind of calm that comes after a storm passes. They made me an offer, she said. Full pension, medical coverage, and a retirement package that actually acknowledges my 31 years of service. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing my own settlement papers. About time they saw your worth. Funny how that works, isn't it? She gave a soft laugh that carried decades of perspective. All those years of being the invisible woman who kept the numbers straight. Now suddenly they can't stop talking about my invaluable institutional knowledge. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, Kyle had pushed Janine to the margins, excluded her from meetings, assigned her work to younger staff who barely understood basic accounting principles. Now here she was, getting the golden handshake she'd earned 3 times over. You taking it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Already signed, she said. My last day is in 2 weeks, just enough time to properly transition everything. She paused. Unlike some people's methods. We both knew who she meant. Kyle's departure had been as messy as his management style. A string of unfinished projects and confused reports that would take months to untangle. What about you? She asked. Have you looked at their final offer? I glanced down at the thick envelope on my desk. Got it right here. 6 figures. Clean break. No strings attached. The number still felt surreal. More than enough to launch my consulting business with a solid cushion. And the non-disclosure agreement? Carefully worded, I said. I can't discuss specific dollar amounts or internal documents. But nothing stops me from being honest about my experience, if anyone asks. That had been a sticking point in negotiations. I wasn't about to let them buy my silence completely. We met for coffee the next morning at our usual spot, away from the corporate campus where we'd spent so many years. Janine looked different somehow. Lighter, like she'd set down a heavy load she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. You know what Kyle told me once? She said, stirring her tea. That I was resistant to modern methods. Because I insisted on maintaining backup records and cross-checking his reports. Those outdated methods just saved both our careers, I pointed out. And ended his. She took a sip, considering. Though, I suppose he ended it himself, really. We just provided the evidence. I nodded. Kyle's reputation was in tatters. Word had spread through the industry grapevine. The kind of informal network that no PR team can control. His LinkedIn profile had gone dark. Last I heard, he'd moved back to his hometown, probably to regroup and reinvent himself somewhere else. Have you signed your papers yet? Janine asked. Doing it this afternoon. I pulled out the envelope. Want to witness a moment of corporate history? She smiled and reached into her purse, producing a fancy pen I'd never seen before. Here, I bought this specifically for signing my retirement papers. Seemed fitting to use something special. The pen felt heavy in my hand, one of those nice ones that makes you write more carefully just by holding it. I opened the envelope and laid out the documents, finding the flagged signature lines one by one. You know, Janine said as I signed, for all his talk about modernization, Kyle never understood what really makes a company work. It's not flashy initiatives or PowerPoint decks. It's people who give a damn. I finished, signing the final page. People like you. And you, she added. I sat back, looking at my signature, The same one Kyle had tried to forge, now marking the end of his power play and the beginning of my next chapter. The settlement was official. No going back, no second thoughts. Janine raised her cup. 2 new beginnings? And to keeping receipts? I added, clinking my coffee mug against her teacup. We sat there a while longer, 2 professionals who'd weathered the storm and come out stronger. Not victims, not bitter ex-employees, but people who'd stood their ground and won on their own terms. The morning crowd bustled around us, but we were in no hurry anymore. That felt like the sweetest victory of all. 3 weeks after signing those papers, I stood in an empty office space downtown, keys in hand. The realtor had given me a good deal. Previous tenant had gone under, and they needed someone reliable. Funny how things work out sometimes. The space wasn't much to look at yet. Basic setup, reception area, 2 private offices, and a conference room. But it had good bones, as they say. Large windows let in natural light, and the building had that solid, old-school, professional feel you don't get in those glass and steel towers. I'd spent the first week after leaving Lakeview just decompressing at home. Sarah, my wife, kept asking if I was okay, probably worried I'd fall into some kind of post-career depression. But honestly, I felt lighter than I had in years. You don't realize how much weight you're carrying until you set it down. Remember those old warehouse safety videos about proper lifting technique? They always said the same thing. It's not just about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to put it down. Took me 22 years to learn that lesson. The sign company came by on a Tuesday. Simple, clean design, Integrity Logistics, in brushed metal letters. Below that, Thomas Everett, Principal Consultant. Watching them install it, I thought about all those times I'd walked past the executive nameplates at Lakeview, never imagining I'd have my own. My phone buzzed. Another LinkedIn notification. Since updating my profile, the connections had been rolling in. Not just random headhunters, but people I'd worked with over the years. Vendors who remembered how I'd always shot straight with them. Competitors who respected how I handled tough situations. Even a few former clients who'd moved to other companies. One message stood out. Tom, heard what happened at Lakeview. Their loss. We've got a distribution center mess in Cincinnati. Could use your eyes on it. Interested? It was from Marcus Chen, VP of Operations at a mid-sized retailer. We'd been on opposite sides of a contract negotiation years back. I'd pushed for fair terms instead of trying to squeeze them dry. He hadn't forgotten. I set up my laptop on a folding table. Proper furniture would come later. And started drafting my business framework. 22 years of solving problems, building systems, and watching others fail had taught me exactly what companies needed. Someone who'd tell them the truth, not just what they wanted to hear. Integrity Logistics. I typed. Operations consulting with a focus on sustainable excellence through ethical leadership and proven systems. Below that, I listed my core services, process audits, team development, crisis management. All the things I'd done for years, but now on my terms. The phone rang. My new business line. It was Janet from the Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Everett? Just calling to confirm you're still speaking at next week's logistics roundtable? Wouldn't miss it, I told her. The topic? Building trust. Based operations. A little on the nose maybe, but sometimes the obvious message is the right one. I spent the afternoon setting up my project management software and responding to inquiries. 3 serious prospects already, all referred by people who knew my work. Word travels fast in this industry, both the good and the bad. Kyle had learned that lesson the hard way. Around 4, Sarah stopped by with a housewarming gift for the office. A really nice coffee maker. Can't run a consulting business on break room sludge, she said, setting it up. The familiar smell of good coffee filled the space, making it feel more like mine. How's it feeling? She asked, looking around. Different from the corporate life? I thought about it while the coffee brewed. You know that satisfaction you get when you finish a project exactly right? When everything lines up and you know you did it the way it should be done? She nodded. It feels like that, I said, but all the time. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the metal letters of my sign and casting long shadows across the new carpet. In the quiet, I could hear the gentle hum of the HVAC system, a sound that had once been background noise in countless offices, but now marked the rhythm of my own space. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Tom, heard you've gone independent. We should talk. Got a situation that needs your kind of expertise. I smiled, remembering something my first warehouse supervisor told me. In this business, your reputation arrives before you do. He was right. But what he didn't mention was that sometimes your reputation builds you a whole new future. The morning sun caught the brushed steel lettering just right, making Integrity Logistics gleam like a fresh start. I paused outside my office door, key in hand, taking in that moment. Even after 3 weeks, seeing my name there still gave me a little jolt of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, more like confirmation that doing things the right way eventually leads you where you need to be. Inside, the coffee maker Sarah bought me was already warming up today's first pot. The aroma of dark roast filled my modest but clean office space. I adjusted my tie, casual but professional, just like I wanted this new chapter to be, and settled into my chair with a fresh cup. My morning routine now included checking industry news, and today's headlines caught my eye. Lakeview Supply had issued their final statement about the internal investigation. The language was careful, corporate sanitized, but the message was clear. Full transparency about the ethical breaches, commitment to rebuilding trust, and a complete restructuring of senior management. Kyle's name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Out of curiosity, I pulled up LinkedIn. Kyle's profile had vanished, deactivated sometime in the past week. His rapid rise and faster fall had become a cautionary whisper in industry circles. Even his name had been quietly removed from all the board memos and company materials, like erasing a mistake from a whiteboard. My inbox pinged. It was from Janine. Subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." She'd attached a photo of herself on a beach in Florida, looking relaxed and happy in retirement. Her message was simple. "We did the right thing, Tom. That's worth more than any corner office." She was right. I'd never wanted revenge. That's a poison you drink yourself, hoping the other person feels it. What I'd wanted was the truth. Simple, documented, undeniable truth. Sometimes that's more devastating than any planned takedown could be. The morning traffic flowed steadily outside my window. I watched people hurrying into their office buildings, carrying their coffee cups and ambitions. How many of them were sitting on their own truths, I wondered, waiting for the right moment to stand up? My phone buzzed. Another consulting request. Word had gotten around about how the Lakeview situation played out, and suddenly, integrity-focused operations was more than just a nice tagline. It was what companies wanted to hear. Funny how doing the right thing can become your best business strategy. The HR director's final report had landed yesterday. Reading, it felt like closing a book, not with a bang, but with the quiet satisfaction of everything being set right. They documented every manipulation, every forged signature, every deleted record. Kyle's attempts to cover his tracks had only made the trail clearer. I took another sip of coffee, remembering that morning in the hospital when everything seemed to be falling apart. The group chat messages, the laughing emojis, the casual cruelty of it all. Now, those same people were sending private messages, asking if I was taking clients, looking for a way to do business the right way. My desk phone lit up, the morning's first client call. Before picking up, I glanced at the framed document on my wall, my business license. Below it was a simple quote I had printed. "Excellence is not a skill. It's an attitude." I'd always believed that. Now I was building a business on it. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across my desk. Outside, the morning rush was in full swing, people hurrying into buildings much bigger and fancier than my modest office. But I wasn't watching them anymore. I had work to do, clients to help, systems to build. And this time, I was doing it on my feet, not my knees. Looking back, Kyle had done me a favor, though he'd never see it that way. Sometimes the best promotion really is leaving the building, especially when you walk out on your own terms, head high, truth intact. That's not just career advice. That's a life lesson written in brushed steel letters on a quiet office door. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.